Welcome to the Practice Brave podcast. I am the host, Brianna Battles, founder of Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism and CEO of Everyday Battles. I'm a career strength and conditioning coach, entrepreneur, mom of 2 wild little boys, and a lifelong athlete. I believe that athleticism does not end when motherhood begins, and this podcast is dedicated to coaching you by providing meaningful conversations, insights, and interview topics related to fitness, mindset, parenting, and of course, all the nuances of pregnancy and postpartum. From expert interviews to engaging conversations and reflections, this podcast is your trustworthy, relatable resource for learning how to practice brave through every season in your life. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Practice Brave podcast. Today, I am very happy to have Rachel Selman back on the podcast. If you missed it, we have recorded previously when we first helped publish a research study kind of supporting the postpartum athlete, really kind of looking at their timeline of returning to sport postpartum. So that's how we first connected. And it's been awesome to see her growth over the last couple of years and her new role within NSCA, which is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So Rachel, excited to have you here today to talk about what life has been like for you and how all of your worlds are kind of combining to better support female athletes.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So give us a little bit of background information on you, your work, what you do, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'm a physical therapist. I have my strength and conditioning certification through the NSCA, and I also have my performance and sports scientist certification through the NSCA. So the CSCS, as you know, is kind of more of like the performance realm of things. And then the CPSS, so the performance side of that, or performance and sports scientist side, essentially gives me a little more like play and wiggle room in the research world, which is how you and I connected. And so being able to like interpret research papers, decide what's actually quality information, what's not, publish our own studies, making sure that those are high quality and appropriate. And the reality is that there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't exactly fit the bill. And especially with the field that we work in can be difficult to navigate. So part of my job is to kind of find that information, shut down misinformation, and also acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do, especially in women's health. I think it's getting better. You and I talked about it's a little bit trendy right now per se, but gosh, we have so much work to do, and so much to learn and so much to explore over the next, decades. So really excited for what's coming, and CPSS just gives me a little bit more kind of wiggle room in that area to continue research and hopefully change this field really from the inside out. Like, yes, I treat patients. So I work with postnatal athletes, recreational, elite. I work in a high performance gym right now. So I work with a lot of professional athletes and male clients as well, who we talk about pelvic health, which is a whole different realm. My last clinic was mostly female, and so that was pretty easy to transfer. But it's amazing how many light bulbs you see go off with guys who have, chronic back pain and hip pain, and you start talking about the pelvic floor, and they're like, "Oh gosh, that is me. That does affect me." So that's been interesting in the past kind of year or so, moving more into that space, which is how I kind of got a little bit more involved with the NSCA in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your new role with NSCA?
So I am on the nomination committee. So the nomination committee is basically the NSCA narrows it down to 4 candidates. So they take 4 candidates that they feel are qualified and then put those out to the members and let the members choose 2. And so the members kind of voted from that narrowed down pool. And basically what we do on the nomination committee is basically ensure that the leadership of the NSCA is really what we're looking for, that they actually represent the values of the members. We do interviews for like the president of the NCA, for the board of directors. So we kind of like make sure that the field that we put out there to the membership actually, one, is qualified. So we go kind of vet their background, make sure all that's accurate. And then 2, make sure that, again, our goal is to represent the membership. So if the goal is to represent the membership, you need to know what the membership is looking for so that the people that you put in those leadership roles have the actual capability to implement the policies that you feel are important.
Well, and I love that. And congratulations on that. I love that they have a woman in this kind of position now, which is really important. For those of you who don't know, the National Strength and Conditioning Association is an incredible organization. I have been certified through them since 2008. And when I first got certified at like 22, right out of college, like there were hardly any women in the room, and definitely nobody close to my age. I always felt like I was just sticking out like a sore thumb, and just kind of figuring out like my realm in strength conditioning, what exactly, like what path I wanted to take. And I liked that the CSCS was pretty open-ended. It could be applied to a lot of different pursuits that ultimately I did end up kind of going down from, Division 1 coaching there to corporate wellness to personal training. It all was just very complementary, but that's been a huge piece of that organization that I've loved to see grow. And I'm really excited that from a leadership perspective, that there is more women. There are more women involved in the NSCA and at a high level too. So I'm so appreciative of you kind of stepping into that role. And I love that this is a new direction.
Yeah, and I'm thankful too to the NSCA for putting me in that position to be voted into that by the membership. And I'm thankful to the membership for voting for that. I mean, right, that kind of shows like, hey, this is what we're looking for. Like, this is someone who we feel like could represent us and represent what we want to see in the NSCA. You and I both know, like, the strength and conditioning world is generally male dominated. And the reality is that women face different challenges. The number of people, or the number of women especially, that I see come into the fitness world like really bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and motivated and are incredible people and would be incredible trainers, and then don't make it for whatever reason, because it's a hard field to really, one, work in as a female, but two, succeed in as a female.
Right.
I mean, even personally, even with my background, there's a lot of meetings and things that I go into that I feel like I don't start on level playing ground. Like, I am kind of having to go in there and really prove myself. And, sometimes I'm like, maybe that's just me and me being how I am. But there's a lot of times where that's like somewhat reinforced. And especially because the physical therapy side that I do, so much of it is orthopedics. And orthopedics is really male dominated, right? There's not very many orthopedic female surgeons. Right. And the number of times I've gone into a marketing meeting or meeting a new surgeon in the area or whatever, and I'll go in and I'll have a male student with me who's not even graduated from PT school. We'll walk into the room and the doctor thinks that I'm the student and he's the physical therapist. And you're like, I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, right? So you have to like go in there and you're like, how am I still not on level playing ground? So you kind of go in there feeling like I'm in a little bit of a hole. And part of that, I think, is like growing into yourself a little bit and putting your foot down and saying, listen, I'm qualified to be here and I deserve this. And part of it is also like stepping back and being like, but these are the reasons that not every female lasts in this field. Like, not every female feels like they're welcomed in the training room, and not every female feels like they're an equal part of the team that they're placed on. And it's not just something that we're all randomly inherently feeling. Like, there are reasons for that. And hopefully that's what we can kind of start to pick away at a little bit.
No, I love that. And you're right. There's so much turnover for women in strength conditioning for a variety of reasons. And honestly, women in coaching, period, unless it's, maybe more of the online space or personal trainer. But if we're talking like strength conditioning, performance realm, there's just a lot of turnover there, and maybe not getting the support they need from the administration or feeling like a sense of respect or worthiness or belonging. And so I do love that you're representing like the people's voice, so to speak, and getting more women in strength and conditioning, or just honestly more women in coaching positions where we can say, like, I have the education, I have the experience, I'm acquiring the experience. And like, if I also want to become a mom, or if I want to, pursue like this growth trajectory that women may or may not experience, like, I'm going to have the support. I can do both. There's a place for me to do both.
Yeah. And I don't have all the answers. I mean, again, I would argue being a working mom is I can't even say one. It is the hardest thing I've ever done. There is no balance. I think that that's kind of a myth. I always tell people, like, when I say balance, I don't mean at the end of the day. Like, today for me is a very heavy work day. I am not going to be home a lot, but tomorrow I will be. So I try to like look at the end of the month. Was my month relatively balanced? Because there are days that my work requires more. And I try to think of that example a lot about like, some balls are rubber and some balls are glass. And like, what can I drop today? Because I can't juggle all of them. At least not well. And I'm used to doing things really well because I generally am kind of a perfectionist. And in some ways that can be really difficult when you step into motherhood. But the strength and conditioning world doesn't exactly allow that to happen, especially like you talked about D1 athletics. I remember when I worked at Georgia Tech, the schedule for that was, there was no way you could have a family and do that at the same time. And I loved it. It was wonderful. It's like, okay, wow, this is what I've always thought I wanted to do. And then you step in there as a mom and you're like, how? I can't do this. And it's interesting because I feel like when I had kids, or even just being the age I am now, you know, when I walk into meetings or walk into things, even if the people don't know I have kids, they kind of generally know I'm of like childbearing age, right? So maybe you don't know I have kids, but it's going to be like on the table. And that I think automatically becomes a little bit of a barrier, unfortunately. Whereas for my husband, he, I think in a lot of ways was viewed as now more responsible, right? Like he's settled down, he's got a family, like he must be really responsible and he must really have it all together. But I didn't get that same benefit. Then it became like, okay, no, it's almost like you're more of a liability once kids come into the picture, like having to employ someone who has kids. I mean, kids are going to be sick and kids are going to be need to take it, like taking places. And so it's something that's been really difficult to navigate. And for me, that's why I own my own clinic now, because I can make my own schedule, which is unfortunate that it had to be that way because it's not something that everyone wants to do. And I understand that. But again, I think conversations like this, and I think like moving into these roles and like saying like, listen, women want to work in strength and conditioning. It's not that the want is not there. It's that this is not a place that accommodates women.
Right.
And there are only so many years that we can have kids. And there's only so many years that that's going to be an opportunity to us. And that also is a time where I'm still really trying to grow my reputation. I'm still really trying to develop my skills. Like I'm still really trying to get feedback. And so hopefully we can, you know, work on answers because I don't have them all either, right? Like I think back to that job at Georgia Tech and I'm like, well, what do you do? Like, how do you make that a job that's friendly to families? I don't have great answers, right? But that's what you have to bring to the table and say like, hey, do you have a different idea than I have? Or maybe like I have a piece of an idea, but I'm not sure how to implement that. Could we do that on a bigger level? Kind of like I think about the Olympics where they didn't have any like nursing rooms or anything. And this time they did because someone stepped up and was like, guys, this is ridiculous. This makes no sense. You have all these women here who are generally the same age, generally have kids or are thinking about having kids, and you don't have the facilities to accommodate them. And to have the athletes like step up, should they have to do that? No. But I think we've learned probably at this point, stuff doesn't change unless you're like loud about it and you're the squeaky wheel. So you have to be the squeaky wheel and step up and be like, this is absurd. Like, how can we not? I remember, I think it was Alex Morgan wanted to take her daughter to the last Olympics and they said no. And she was still nursing. And it was like this huge, this makes no sense, right? She's going to ship her milk back from, I think it was China. And like, why can't I just bring my daughter? And until someone was loud about it, it wasn't going to change.
Right. Until they look too bad. Then they're like, well, I guess we can do something about it.
Yeah. They're like, wait, this actually does affect people. And that's really going to affect like our kind of PR and how we do this. And it's unfortunate that some things have to be that way, but it is the way that it is for a lot of things. And so again, hoping that you can kind of go in and be a little bit of a squeaky wheel and be like, listen, these are things that are affecting people. And I'm sure you know about it. I'm sure you've heard about it, but now you've got someone who's not going to let it go.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Like, you know, when I was coaching college, you know, I was in my mid 20s and like really eager. Like I had just gotten my master's or was in the process of that. I was still working another job and coaching. It was just such a like hustle era. And then I remember getting pregnant and coaching, working, doing club too, like all of these different things, knowing that like, what's actually going to happen when there's a baby here? Like, I'm okay now that I'm pregnant, but like you had said, you're almost like looked at differently because now you're almost a liability or like, you aren't, you know, you just aren't as trustworthy because you're unstable, right? Or you're like, you're more unpredictable now that there's this baby on the horizon, or what's it going to be like? Are you going to leave? Are you going to do this? Or are you going to do that? And like kind of looked at as high maintenance. And if you're a female in a male dominated world, the last thing you want to be looked at is like as a convenience or different, or judged for that. But at the same time, you're like, but I want to be a mom, and that's important to me too. And that will take priority over what, you know, these opinions are of me. But yeah. I mean, I coached that whole first year of Cade's life. and just like the chaos of that year, as if like becoming a first time mom isn't hard enough. Like I think back on that and I'm like, I never had a chance of actually like feeling good. Like even if I didn't have postpartum depression, I don't think I would have actually been okay because I was not in an environment where I had the chance of feeling okay and supported. It just wasn't like that. It's cutthroat. It's you're recruiting, you're there at these times, you're doing these things, you take your work home with you. There's just this level of performance that doesn't end when you're an athlete. It continues on when you're coaching. It continues on through an entire administration where there's sense of urgency and just not a lot of support. And like, there's a lot of people that listen to this that are practitioners, that are moms, that are coaches. And then we have more people that are like, hey, I'm 27 and I am a strength conditioning coach. I'm working in the college level. I'm working in some kind of performance capacity. I want to have a baby. What are my options? And like the fact that we don't have great options spelled out other than open your own clinic like you did or start your own business like I did when I was like, no, what, I'm bowing out. I'm quitting. And I don't have a plan B. I just knew that I could not continue for the sake of my baby and my brain, the environment I was in. But like we have to have some better options than just entrepreneurship.
My last boss, actually, when I was leaving to do this, he was kind of like, what are you doing? And at that point, I didn't know if I was ready to open my own clinic. But I just, like you said, I had reached that point where I was like, this corporate, like, this is not working for me. And we had a conversation after I kind of put in my notice and said, like, listen, I'll be here for 30 more days, but I've got to move on. And I remember him asking me, he was like, so what are you doing? Yeah. And I literally said something along the lines of like, I'll go work at Chick-fil-A. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like I have kids and they are my priority. And the, quote unquote, creative solution that had been come up with for me to stay in that role was that maybe I could work some Saturdays. Like, okay, I can't come in, early because basically I was having to change my schedule to do kid drop off and pick up. And the way that pre-K worked, I wasn't going to be able to work 40 hours during the work week. And so the creative solution was that they basically were going to have me come in like occasionally on the weekend. And I'm like, that's not a creative solution. Like that doesn't work. The whole point is I need to be with my kids on the weekend. But no one in the roles that was like coming up with these creative solutions either A, had children, or B, did not have a stay-at-home partner who did that part for them. Right. So like, oh yeah, when your kid's sick, your partner just stays home with them. But like my husband and I both work. Yeah. And my husband's incredible in that we really trade off. Like today, Eli doesn't have camp and he doesn't have school, but my husband stayed home with him today so that I could come do things that I needed to do. And tomorrow I'll do that with Eli so he can go to work. So we're very much a team. But again, like you said, the answer shouldn't be, I have to open my own business because that doesn't work for everyone. We've been really like lucky. And I think the hard work has backed that luck, but that shouldn't be the answer for every single mom who wants to have kids and also still wants to work in the strength and conditioning world, right? There should be other answers. And my hope is that we can spark that discussion and try to kind of like make it something that's a little bit more normal to be like, I like this job. I want to continue it. And I also want to have kids. And that's also going to change my priorities, but that's also okay, right? Yeah. Like it's okay if my kids are my first priority. I can still be an incredible clinician. I can still work really hard. Yeah. And I don't want to be shamed for that. I remember my first job when I went back after I had Eli, I was still bleeding. I was still leaking through my shirt at random times of day. And I was treating a gazillion patients a day. I could barely keep my eyes open. Like, I just remember thinking, I don't understand how anyone does this. And just, it's just a wild world. And I can absolutely see, like, I look back on my career in the past 5 to 10 years, and I think like there are so many points at which I could have said, I'm done, right? Like I'm throwing in the towel. I worked really hard for this and I really enjoy it, but I can't do it anymore. And there's so many points that could have happened. Yeah. So I can absolutely see why it happens for so many women.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's sad because sometimes they feel like once they pause it, it's hard to get back into. But I think another conversation that we have to start extending is like, there are a lot of options within the strength conditioning realm that are not just collegiate athletics or like only sports performance. Like that can be applied in a lot of different settings. And like, let's get creative with what that actually looks like, what those positions can look like, whether it's entrepreneurial or otherwise. Like, it doesn't have to be as narrow of a box as I think we've we've made it out to be over the years. And I mean, I've seen that play out in my own work, like a male dominated profession of strength conditioning. Okay, well, I'm actually going to coach female athletes. And within that, I'm going to coach pregnant and postpartum female athletes. So let's just keep niching down more and more and more. And you know what? It is more than just a thing. Like, it is a big thing. It is a large population that needs more support. And frankly, more coaches that know how to work with that niche population. And if we can serve that population, we can find other niche populations where that certification or that kind of education can truly provide excellent support. And it doesn't have to be within the boxes or the confines that I think we've been made to believe or that we've been told.
Well, and even being, I think in the roles that we're in as entrepreneurs, like that's fabulous that, we were able to do that. I'm very thankful for that. But at the same time, like now I look at my job too, as part of it. I was like, as my company grows, as your company grows, I do take it on myself too, to make sure that, the people that are working for me have an opportunity that I didn't have in a different company. Right. So like I have another physical therapist who works for me, and like she's a physical therapist in her own right. She has her own license. She doesn't need me to like micromanage. Like she has 2 young kids. She works her tail off. She deserves to be paid what she deserves. Right. Like, I mean, that's number one, is like, now I can support a family. But I also too, like, I mean, I know she's responsible. Like she can manage 2 kids. I know she's capable of doing those things. And so now my job as an entrepreneur is basically to try and provide, and this is where I think the courses come in that you and I've done too, is more of like, let me provide something that I needed in that moment. So let me provide you a work environment that is flexible, that is understanding, that totally gets that, hey, in the summer, there might be a couple of weeks where I can't see patients because that's when we go on summer vacation. And that's really important to me while my kids are this age. Understanding like Thanksgiving week. I think about the holiday weeks, for example, my last job, like we worked a lot of holidays, at least like half days. And why? You know what I mean? Like you want to be home with your kids at that time, and that's okay. That doesn't make you selfish. That doesn't make you not a hard worker. It doesn't make you lazy. I think if anything, it shows that your priorities in line, that you're an adult who understands what that means. You have boundaries, and that's the kind of person that you should want working for you. And so now that I'm in the role that I'm in, as we grow, I always feel like it's kind of, on our backs to now say like, let me provide this opportunity, because like the PT that works for me now was ready to be done with PT. Like she was going to go be a stay-at-home mom, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If anything, I think that's a harder job. But she, like you said, was worried, like if I get out of physical therapy and then, 5-10 years from now, my kids are in school and I really want to get back into it, gosh, then the evidence has changed. I didn't keep up with my CEUs. It's really hard to get your foot back in the door at that point. And we all kind of look at each other like, why are all the women dropping out of the workforce? It's like, well, what do you expect? The cost of childcare is absolutely bonkers. So now that I'm in the role that I'm in, part of that is to like provide that opportunity for other people and say like, this is what I would have wanted. This is what would have made things worth it to me. And I can give that to you. And hopefully that model starts to become something that's more of like, this makes sense for this population, right? And we have to understand that this population is not a small subset. Just like you said, like these little niche, like smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you're like, wow, I'm in like this tiniest little area of expertise, but look how many people are there, right?
Yeah.
It's insane. And so like how many moms are in this exact same situation of like, I wish I had a job that allowed me to work, enjoy my work, enjoy what I'm doing, but also prioritize that I'm a mom first and understand that. And like, that's what I try to provide now. And I hope that other companies start to do that. I see it more and more with maternity leave. I feel like is again, a kind of trendy topic lately, and more companies are providing actual maternity leave, but still not near what we should be having. But why is a mom going to come back to work for a company that like, again, makes you come back when you're bleeding and like leaking through your shirt? Like that's just not, there's nothing natural about that.
And even in like coaching realm, like even if it wasn't, for me, it wasn't like you have to be back at this day and time. It was like an unsaid expectation of like when you have to be high performing, again, when you are already feel like you have more eyes on you because you are one of the few women and you don't want to be like, I never wanted that to be a thing. Like I didn't want to be looked at differently, treated differently. So it was just really like, okay, well, I got to prove this. I got to like, it's like that athlete brain, right? You athlete brain your way through everything. So yeah, it was going back at very early, like 3-4 weeks postpartum, trying to like, I remember like look at a spreadsheet and I was like, I haven't slept in so long. Like I can't look at Excel back then, like I could not focus and just trying to force that. Like you're not functioning. You are not a healthy human. And that is not going to, that's not a good example for the athletes we're trying to coach. That's not a good example for just overall like the health and wellness of anybody's employees. So, I mean, there's so many issues there, but I do see that like over the last 10 years, the amount of growth that there has been in recognizing that and just like how many more female coaches there are. Because like I said, in 2008, it was a room packed with a lot of men and it was fine. Again, I never felt like I didn't belong there. It just was something that it was like one of the first times I was like, oh, like there's not a lot of ladies here.
Right. And you feel that way. I mean, the reality is, again, you feel that way for a reason. I try to tell myself, every experience I've had where I've kind of thought like, I can feel that I'm having to dig myself out of a hole just to get to level ground. But that comes from, again, so many experiences where unfortunately that has been the case. I remember my first rotation was at a sports medicine department and there was a male and a female PT. And we were sitting at the desk. We got a referral for a baseball player. And literally on the referral, it said needs to work with a male PT because he plays baseball. And it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like the PT that I was under at the time had way more experience with like elbow injury, like all that kind of stuff than the guy did. But the doctor had gone out of their way to write a male PT. And so it's like stuff like that happens enough times and you're like, okay, this is why I'm feeling that way. Like I'm not pulling that out of nowhere. And I'll tell you again, like the NSCA, we have a women's committee and it essentially is mentors and mentees. So the mentees are essentially women who are new to the field and want, advice and experience and things like that. And that feeling is everywhere. Yeah. I mean, every single female essentially feels the same. I think
and like no one wants to be the victim. This isn't like the mentality stuff. I think this is just like recognizing there are not a lot of people doing this work that I know a lot about. I went to school for this. I got this certification. I have these mentorships and like these hours and these experiences. I have this kind of resume as an athlete. Like we know baseball, we know football, we know lacrosse and water polo and sports and strength. Like we know those things too. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just, that like feeling of like, but there's just not as many of us.
I also feel like for so long, and I feel like this has changed more recently too, but obviously is not something I feel like that's taken full hold at this point. But for so long, women were really pitted against each other. And the reality is they were pitted against each other because there was only so much room for women at the table, right? Like if you're in a leadership organization that's strength and conditioning, there might be one seat for a female. Mm-hmm. And so females are kind of clawing at each other thinking like, okay, I'm better than her and I'm better than her, when the men were not having that same discussion. You know what I mean? It was more of like a, let the members decide and see who deserves to be here. But for so long, the opportunities were limited and that, in a lot of ways pitted women against each other. And so, it felt like to get where you needed to go, you had to tear other people down. And I think now we realize that's not the case. That big like girl tribe, I feel like movement has really taken over, but that was not how things functioned when
the era of Mean Girls, man. Like
yes. and there still are. It's not like they don't exist, but like it doesn't feel as much anymore like you have to like claw and compete. It's more like, hey, there's 10 women who deserve this spot in this position, and we're gonna let people decide like who they want to vote for, right? As opposed to like no matter what, there's only one place for a female. And so opening more of those opportunities allows women to like build on each other's backs and like get better with each other, as opposed to feeling like we're all competing for one opportunity. And that I hope will navigate itself into the coaching world as well. Yeah. And I also feel like, a lot of the guys that I work with, once we start like talking, are so receptive, and that didn't necessarily used to be the case either. I feel like, a lot of guys didn't want to hear anything about it, just felt like, oh, you stay in your realm, I'll stay in mine kind of thing. And I will say that like every time I teach a course, I feel like more and more guys are in the courses and I'm like, okay, this is good. Like we're making progress. It's slow, but it's progress. And, it's one of those things that you have to do from the inside out. So like, yes, of course, our goal is to like make sure that this happens on a really big level. but can we also make sure this happens in our communities too? Like, can I make sure that we're all on the same page? And part of that too has been me learning to open my side and say, like, I'm willing to learn too, right? Like, I want to learn, I want to grow. I'm open to that discussion. Can you teach me something new? And after that, could I teach you something new, right? Can we all learn from each other, as opposed to saying, like, I want to be the only one with this information. And I see this in public health world too, sometimes, where it's like, well, I've been doing this for so long and now everyone is just, on top of it. Whereas it really should be where I think you and I stand is like, we want more people to do this, right? Like, we want this to be more readily available. Why are we gatekeeping this from people when it's so needed?
Right.
And I think that mentality was so present for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just been such a narrow scope. And I think that, like you said, like more men being interested. I think what was interesting for me, even back then, two of my mentors, they, one was Tom DeLong. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us, but he's like in his 60s. And then Pat Colin Carroll, also probably like 60s-ish now. And he was really involved in the youth side of things within NSCA. And the two special things about both of those men, if they were significantly older than me, they easily could have been like my dad. And they saw me at a very young age and what I was interested in, what I was trying to do, how much I was trying to learn. And they both just totally took me under their wing. And they were like, we're going to bring you to the table. Even if you don't feel like you're ready to be at the table, I'm going to bring you to the table, and I'm going to force you to do more and to put you out there, put you in these rooms, put you in these conversations, encourage you. And like, having their endorsement as a young female coach honestly made a huge difference in my confidence level and where I thought like I could have a voice and what I could do, what I could, like, when I was just trying to shoot my shot in different ways early on, whether it was getting something published or, this connection or that speaking engagement, having those two guys who had so much experience coaching and whatnot, and in different organizations, really kind of go to bat for me. I feel like having that when you are a young female coach, whether it's from a man or a woman, whoever, like, that belief does so much and can truly change the trajectory of somebody's life, because it instills like, you do belong here. You should do this. Like, this is good for you. We can figure it out. I'm going to support you. And that mentorship, just, it's so much more than this is my system or my process that I use, my coaching methodology. No, like, the mentorship needs to be like inviting you and making you believe in yourself and what you can do.
100%. And I think, again, we owe that to each other, like, and again, trying to grow this field and trying to make it something that actually is accessible to everyone. I remember when I was probably 2 or 3 years out of PT school. So I wasn't super experienced, but I wasn't necessarily a quote unquote new grad either. And I worked in a place that was like attached to a surgery center. And I remember one time they came over and they were like, hey, we've got this patient. Can you come over here really quick before they like go home, just to meet them essentially? And I walked in the room and the doctor, again, was an older male. And I walked in there, and instead of him saying like, hey, this is Rachel, she's the physical therapist you're going to see next week, like, you guys, I just wanted you to meet, so she's a familiar face. I walked in there and I was standing in the corner and I was kind of like, hi, nice to meet you. And he was like, this little girl is going to be doing your physical therapy. And then he looked at me and he was like, do you know what a latissimus dorsi is? Just like that. And I was like, I can't believe what's happening. Like, I went to 7 years of school for this, but he had done a shoulder replacement and had used the lat, and like, I guess was concerned that maybe I didn't know what the lat was. And like, maybe I didn't understand the surgery. And now this patient, like, I've been introduced to her as like this little girl,
right, who doesn't know.
And I'm a full-blown adult with a doctorate degree. And what kind of confidence does that give the patient either? Not even just me, but like the person that now I'm having to treat. And he's asking if I know what the muscle is that he used. Yeah. Whereas you could have an opportunity, which again, I see this much more now, where I walk in and, someone will introduce me and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I worked with her. She's wonderful. She has XYZ cert, you know what I mean? Hypes you up. So just like you said, gives you some credibility so that you don't feel like you have to dig that out for yourself. And that's huge.
You can't make until you make it in this field. Like, you can try to get there, but like, you do need to have people like endorse you and say like, no, like, she knows her shit. She knows what she's.
Well, it's connections too. It is. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation is a lot of it is what you know, but a lot of it too is who you know. Yeah. And the more connected you are. And that's part of, again, what this mentorship process has been like is more like, let's just get connected. We don't have to be best friends at the end of this, but let's just touch base so that when we go to these conferences or whatever, you have a familiar face. You have someone that if you have a question, you feel like you can text.
Yeah.
And especially with the women's committee, it's more like you have a female to ask. You know what I mean? Because again, it is so hard to find female mentors in this space because females don't make it very long in this space. So when you're like, I want to ask someone a question about how did you do this with kids? And like, I mean, like, just like we started the conversation before we even started recording, like, how's this season of life that you're in? Like, I want to know about it because that's coming up for me too. And being able to say like, hey, you as a business owner, as a mom, what is that like? Like, what do I need to know? And you can't ask that to everyone because not everyone's on the same page. And I do think, you know, guys are stepping up. Like, I mean, again, my husband's an incredible dad and he's an incredible member of my team and we all get to work together. And I'm so grateful for that. But I also know that hasn't always been the reality. So much of it has fallen on women for so long. And so again, a lot of the guys that, you know, you'll get mentorship from cannot relate because they haven't done the same thing that you're doing. So having female mentors is key, and having female mentors that can hype you up and say like, you know what you're talking about. Like, stick on yourself, like trust yourself right here and like believe that you are all this work that you've put in.
Right. Mentorship isn't just like about the career accolades that you're able to gather. For me, I look at that, I'm like, I want to learn from somebody that like I actually admire, like that they have the lifestyle that I want, not just the degrees, not just the amount of money they've made or the reputation, whatever. I want to learn from people that have the lifestyle that I'm going after. And how did you acquire that? Mm-hmm. Where like you're able to stay in the game of coaching or of business, but also like you are living the life that I want with my family, with my kids, with my relationship. How did you do that? Because it's so like, I do think we get so focused on just like, well, what steps did you take in order to be prepared for this test or that job or blah, blah, blah. But we're not looking at the bigger picture of like, what is sacrificed and what is not sacrificed? Those are the questions I think need to be asked. And frankly, definitely by women, because we just have different considerations if we're choosing to become mothers. Our body gets sacrificed, our brain, our life, our levels, our capacities, certain things just have to change more dramatically if that's a path we're choosing.
Right. And I think too, I mean, on the physical side of things, again, like when women can't recover the way that they should be recovering, or they don't have the support during pregnancy that they need to be able to stay active and keep moving, that adds a whole nother layer. So again, like with what you and I do, like, it's not just about like trying to keep women in the workforce and trying to keep women in the strength and conditioning field from the perspective of this is a hard field to be in as a female. It really is too, like, obviously, physically, what we do is difficult. I need to be able to demonstrate exercises. I need to be able to show you good form. I need to be able to lift heavy weight and do big things. It's not like I'm sitting at a desk most of my day. Most of my time is in the gym. And if I can't do the things that I'm instructing on, that is part of your job. And so if I didn't have, you know, the support that I had in pregnancy and postpartum for the recovery process, that puts my job now in physical jeopardy, not just the feeling of like, I don't know if I belong here. No one else looks like me. Like no one else, you know, is female and I can't ask anybody else what they do when their kids are sick. Like now I also physically can't do this anymore. And that's, again, just adds a whole nother layer to it. It's just a whole different piece and component. And it's just, there's so many things that we have so far to go on.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've come a very long way over the last, you know, since I've been involved in this. I've seen NSCA grow and do so many incredible things, especially for women and getting more women involved like you, serving more female athletes. And I think we just have to keep kind of banding together to keep growing this with the support that coaches get, keeping women in the game, and then supporting the young athletes to like postmenopausal athletes that are still trying to pursue fitness at all different in all different ways, and coaches that are able to support those populations. So very grateful for your time here. Give us an idea of where we can learn more about the work that you're doing, where we can find you.
So my clinic is called Synthesis Physical Therapy. So you can find me on Instagram under Synthesis Physical Therapy. I check all my messages. I do all that because I have patients reach out to me on there all the time. So never hesitate to reach out on there as a message. You can also just learn more about my clinic and kind of my background on our website at synthesisphysicaltherapy.com. If you are a member of the NSCA and you have things that you want to talk about, that's part of my job now. So send me a message and like, let's talk about it. Like that is part of our job, is to make sure that the people that we put in these positions really represent what you want. So if you're listening to this and you voted in that election and you were like, part of that was my hope would be that we could move XYZ topic forward, that's part of my job. So I'm happy to talk about that. That is kind of the whole purpose of this, is like, let's get topics on the table that may not have been on the table in the past and actually make sure that they move forward. Even if we don't have all the answers, we can start at least picking away at them. So don't hesitate to reach out if there's something that you want addressed in that realm.
I love it. And what is your Instagram handle again?
Synthesis Physical Therapy.
Okay, perfect. We will have all of that linked in the show notes. Rachel, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for coming on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practice Brave podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review and help us spread the work we are doing to improve the overall information and messaging in the fitness industry and beyond. Now, if you are pregnant and you are looking for a trustworthy exercise program to follow, I have you covered. The Pregnant Athlete Training Program is a well-rounded program for pregnancy with workouts for each week that are appropriate for your changing body. That's 36 weeks of workouts, 3 to 4 workouts each week, and tons of guidance on exercise strategy. We also have an at-home version of that program. If you are postpartum and you're looking for an exercise program to follow, the 8-week postpartum athlete training program would be a really great way to help bridge the gap between rehab and the fitness you actually want to do. From there, we have the Practice Brave Fitness program, which is an ongoing strength and conditioning program where you get new workouts each week and have a lot of guidance from myself and my co-coach, Heather Osby. This is the only way that I'm really offering ongoing coaching at this point in time. If you have ever considered becoming a certified pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, I would love to have you join us. Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism is a self-paced online certification course that will up-level your coaching skills and help connect the dots between pelvic health and long-term athletic performance, especially during pregnancy and postpartum. Become who you needed and become who your online and local community needs by becoming a certified pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. Thank you again for listening to the Practice Brave podcast. I appreciate you. And please help me continue spreading this messaging, this information, and this work.